Of Lindhagen's estate, the aristocrat's wife gives birth to a child. The maids and servants who attended the birth are surprised that the husband has not arrived to support his wife. Everyone understood perfectly well that he was a hero of the empire who often had more important things to do. But missing the birth of his own child was unacceptable, even for a man of his status. The servants gathered around the bed on which their mistress lay. The woman had a very weak body, and giving birth to a child was a very difficult procedure for her. It was possible that the duke's wife would die. Everyone knew this. The woman in labor brought the baby to its mother. It was a healthy girl, but it was too late. The woman in labor died immediately after the baby was born. The women were still trying to help their mistress. While some tried to call a doctor and save the life of the duke's wife, one of the maids took the child and left in an unknown direction. Her intentions were not good or pious. Walking quickly through the hall of the estate, the woman promised that the girl was lucky to be born into the duke's family, but unlucky to fall into the hands of this maid. The child would not see a good fate and would disappear forever. The woman continued to say that the girl must have been given a very beautiful name, but she would not be lucky enough to know it. A different fate was prepared for the poor thing, one that she would regret for the rest of her life. 12 years later, a slave girl falls to the ground. A warden stands over her and lashes her with a whip. The girl cannot get up. Her strength leaves her. She loses touch with reality. Another man approaches them. He says that one should not pity or feel sorry for slaves, and the girl is simply ungrateful to her masters for giving her shelter and the right to work and earn a living. The slave gritted her teeth and stood up. She was tired of enduring the abuse and beatings. Her determination was that she was going to leave her tormentors soon. She could not allow them to continue to abuse her. She has been lonely since childhood and has never known kindness and care from strangers. So now she has nothing to lose. The supervisor and her owners are not going to let her go after she finishes her work. The girl will not lose the battle for her life to these scum. Soon she will get a grip on herself and gather her strength for a decisive step in her life. She will definitely not be left there to live out her life after suffering. When she returned to her room in the estate that evening, through the crack in the door, she saw the master talking to a slave trader. This man traded in children, who were his main commodity. The whole horror of the situation was that all the children he bought died very quickly. Everyone around said that it was he who tortured them and led to their death. The girl felt uneasy. Meanwhile, the men were discussing a certain slave girl who had caught the attention of the merchant. He was offering a large sum of money for her. The owner of the estate said that the buyer would certainly not regret his decision. The slave girl realized with horror that another child's fate was at stake. She decided that she should find out who exactly was going to be sold and get the poor child out of this cursed place, but it was too late. The buyer could not wait to see the goods, but the master said that the servants would soon bring slave number 5. The girl realized with horror that it was about her. She would be the next victim. She couldn't stand it, and some unknown force pushed her into the room. The owner was surprised, but then he showed her to his guest. At the same time, he explained that the girl could get to know the new owner. The slave turned around quickly and ran down the corridor. The man asked her to stop, but she did not listen to him. The poor thing was ready to run to the ends of the earth from this terrible fate. After all, it was better than falling into the hands of a pervert. In the middle of the corridor, she crashed into a man and his partner, who were hidden under the hoods of their cloaks. The girl was terrified that she had fallen into the hands of her tormentor and that her chances of survival were gone. Unexpectedly for her, one of the strangers took her by the chin and looked into the girl's eyes. He asked her not to be afraid, because he had come to save the poor girl, and now no one would be able to insult or mock her. The man hugged the girl tightly and said that he had spent many years trying to find her. He called her his daughter and assured her that from now on they would always be together and no one would dare to touch her. The assistant told the girl that her father, Duke Victor Landhaugen, was standing before her, so he would take her away from this place and no one would dare to disrespect her or insult or torment the poor thing again. A slave trader approached the girl and her father. He immediately recognized the person in front of him. According to the trader, the Duke had come here with his son. Could it be that the reason was that he wanted to buy a slave? But Victor confidently offered to pay 3 times more for the girl. He understood perfectly well that he simply had no other options to save his daughter right now, so all that remained was to bargain for money. The girl's master immediately agreed. He had not even expected to get such a benefit from this slave. However, the slave trader was indignant. He had been the first to offer to buy a stranger, and now he was not going to back down. He was furious and tried to grab the Duke by the jacket. The Duke's aide, who was actually his son, pushed the man to the floor and warned him not to reach out to His Majesty. Victor took the girl in his arms, but she still didn't fully understand what was happening. Her father ordered Ricardo to finish the job and join them. It was time to stop searching and finally return home. The girl hurried after the Duke. She tried to shout at him and tell him that he could be mistaken. After all, in reality, her father had long since died, and she had found herself in slavery for his former services. Victor stopped. He said that the girl looked a lot like his late wife, the girl's mother. Plus, she had a rose-shaped birthmark on her neck. So he couldn't be wrong, not this time. He showed that he also had the same mark. But Ricardo had no such mark, but that didn't mean anything. His mother was another woman, and they were half-brother and sister. The girl looked intently at her father. Finally, the life that had been taken from her since birth was beginning. There was so much interesting stuff in this world, and she was forced to give it up and be a slave. Her father brought her to his estate. The servants bowed to the girl, their new young mistress. The Duke introduced his daughter to everyone present and promised her that everyone would obey her orders and would always come to her aid. A maid approached the girl. She told the mistress that her name was Loria, and from today on she would always serve her. Now it was time to take the mistress to her room and show her the palace in general. The Duke's daughter was amazed. Her room was more like that of a dignitary or a princess. It was luxuriously furnished and everything looked very expensive. Now it would all belong to her. Lying in the bathroom, the girl thought about how she had suddenly found herself in the place of His Majesty's daughter. All her life, she had been a slave without a family or tribe, and now she had suddenly become the daughter of an influential aristocrat. In the banquet hall, the father and Rodrigo were sitting at a huge table. They were waiting for the arrival of a new member of the family. The man and his son were worried about how the girl would react to them. After all, everything happened so suddenly. The daughter entered the hall. After her bath and change of clothes, she looked very beautiful. The father said that she looked very much like his mother when he first met her and fell head over heels in love with her. Before she sat down at the table, the Duke asked her what her daughter's name was in her past life. The girl felt embarrassed and replied that she was usually addressed as number 5. The man disappeared. Ricardo asked if it wasn't too humiliating. His father asked the boy to be polite to his sister and never try to show her his high birth from now on, because they were equals. Finally, their family was reunited. The Duke said that even before she was born, he and his wife, whose name was Noah, had come up with a beautiful name for their daughter. So from now on, her name was Greta. The girl felt embarrassed that her past had been so easily disposed of. Greta fell from her chair. The boy and the father did not know what had happened to her. The last thought before consciousness left her was that the girl knew Greta Lindhaugen very well. It was as if in another life. Greta, in her older years, was lying on the floor in a red dress. Her brother held the sword he had used to stab her in the stomach. He said he should have noticed earlier how selfish his sister was. In our time, the girl was sitting in front of the monitor and playing a game. The screen displayed a picture that depicted Duke Ricardo and his sister. The guy was just saying that otherwise they could have been friends. The girl who was playing the game was crying. She felt very sorry for Ricardo. She considered the Duke's daughter a real thief who deserved to be punished for her actions. But now she was overwhelmed by memories. The stranger recalled the life she had lived in the capital of the country. At that time, slavery had already been banned, but even there, she was not happy. Her family members abused her in every way and beat the girl. As a result, the girl's father killed her with his own hands. The reasons for this act still remain unknown to her. But in this way, she was transported to the world of the game, where her favorite Ricardo was, and she became Lady Greta. The girl regained consciousness in her room. Ricardo was next to her. He hurried to her sister and told her that her father was very worried about her, and together with his son, they were on duty at the sick woman's bedside. Before the girl's inner gaze was the scene of Ricardo standing over her, holding a bloodied sword. Now he didn't even resemble the boy he would become in the future, the one who would end her. Her brother interrupted her thoughts. He said he had to leave to tell her father that the girl had regained consciousness. Greta thought that these were memories from a past life that had ended. In fact, she was a negative character from a video game. She often played this game in her past life. It's hard to believe that after a tragic death, she ended up in this very place and took the place of the antagonist. Autumn. The game was called Blue Star and Flower Dance with You. She was a princess who had been looking for love all her life. At first glance, she was a frivolous girl who was just looking for love adventures. But in reality, the events there took place in a very difficult time. The state was engulfed in a coup. Chaos reigned around, and the heroes had to survive the vicissitudes of that reality. Greta was the main antagonist in the plot. She is Ricardo's half-sister, and at the same time she initiated all the attacks on the princess. Her treatment of the servants was terrible. She did not let anyone pass. She always found fault with something and considered it her duty to mock. For her own benefit, she drove everyone around her to despair. The capricious girl did not even spare her father. But the climax of this was that she wanted to kill her half-brother and the princess. Greta analyzed that in the game, they tried to kill her at the age of 18. She was now 12. So in order to avoid a terrible fate, she had to take care of herself for the next 6 years. In her past life, she died a horrible death. Her father killed her while drunk. He hit her in the head with a bottle, ending her unbearable existence, which was saved only by video games and hanging out with friends. The irony was that by becoming a slave, she finally met her real family, but was destined to die at their hands in the future. And the reason for all this was that she was destined to become a thief and a criminal. Greta thought that she didn't want to die and be reborn anymore. The girl knew the game perfectly. Therefore, the option was to influence events and finally change the course of the future. She simply had to try. She would try her best to avoid the flags that would portend death. Now she was worried about how to live these 6 years without falling into the clutches of death again. Doubts and reflections overwhelmed her. Her father burst into the room. The man was crying. He was very worried about the condition of his daughter, whom he had finally managed to find, and whom he was afraid of losing in such a short time. The girl could not understand his reaction. She was not used to such treatment in her life, but her father was already standing next to her. He said that he was very scared for her. The girl slept all day, and the doctors threw up their hands, not knowing what to do with her. The father put her on the bed. The man was ready to cry again, but Ricardo asked him to calm down. After all, everything was fine with his sister, and the reason could be nerves. After all, she was in a different environment. The Duke said that he would no longer call her Greta, because when he heard it, the girl lost consciousness. But the daughter reassured Victor. She assured him that she liked being called that. Greta said that she decided not to change anything in her name. But in fact, the girl had a firm intention to change her future. So now she had to make everyone around her feel positive. The Duke embraced her. He asked to continue to call him father. After all these years he had been trying to find her. He swore to his late wife on her grave that he would save their daughter from the yoke, wherever fate had thrown her over the years. Victor said that he was grateful to the girl for coming into this world. Greta herself remembered the moments when she cursed her parents for giving birth to her and condemning her to this suffering, and abandoning her to her fate. In her past life, she hated and feared her father. He constantly beat and abused her, considering her even worse than a pet. But now she was treated completely differently and with kindness and respect. It was hard for Greta to call the Duke her dad, but she did it. The past was hard to forget. But now she wanted to believe that this warmth and love were real, and no one would dare to insult and despise her anymore. Her father promised that he would always be on her side and would not let anyone hurt her. After all, the girl had become part of the Duke of Lindhaugen's family, and she would stay with them forever, together with her brother Ricardo. The boy was looking at the girl. He didn't want to ruin this perfect moment, but he felt it necessary to tell his father that sooner or later she would get married and leave his house, so they wouldn't always be together. The man was confused, but he quickly found a solution to this problem. Ricardo did not like this idea very much, and he regretted opening his mouth. The Duke considered it necessary to make Greta his heiress. Thus, the girl was to inherit the title of Duke. Victor would be with her constantly, even if he lost his title. He would act as regent and become a mentor for his daughter, to spend time with her. Now he had to find teachers who would make his daughter a real lady. She had a lot to learn to make up for what she had lost in the shackles of slavery. She had to cope with it. The girl was frightened by such fanatical devotion from her father. She asked Ricardo to help her, but the boy pretended not to hear her. Greta noticed the strange expression on her brother's face, but paid it no attention. Victor promised that she would have everything she wanted. After all, his daughter would become a duchess, and she would experience what it was like to have power and influence over the people around her, to be obeyed, and have her wishes fulfilled. The man swore that he would do whatever she wanted. Ricardo didn't like it. He was tired of listening to his father, and the boy simply left the room. No one thought that he was offended by his father's behavior. The boy came to his room. He was very angry because of his father's behavior. It seemed that he had lost his mind from happiness. However, if he seriously made the girl a duchess, Ricardo would not give up. Gloria stood by her mistress's bed. Greta pretended that she still felt a little weak, but in reality she was preparing to implement the plan. The future had to take on certain shapes for her so that she could feel confident. The plot of the game, as far as the girl remembered, began with the princess's debut, when she turned 18. Then, a procedure was to take place to select candidates for grooms. Ricardo was among them. The girl also guessed that Ricardo and Victor were not related by blood. The Duke must have adopted the boy from some nobleman just in case, so that he could have an heir. Now the young man was angry with her, and was not very happy about the appearance of the daughter of the Duke of Linhaugen. Details of the game indicated that Greta was a half-sister, and was very angry with the princess when she began to get close to Ricardo. As a result, the girl persuaded her father to join the opponents of the crown, and Ricardo, who by that time had become the princess's knight, separated from them and became one of the main enemies of the Duke and his daughter. Greta tried to kill her brother, but in the end, her plan failed and she was killed. But now it is worth making sure that these events did not happen at all. The princess should have been her age. They should have become friends. The girl was given 6 years to live her life away from the game's script. She was to befriend Her Highness the Princess and avoid getting too close to the rebels and royalists. Greta actually thought that the best plan would be to escape from this house. But she really doubted that a girl who had once been a slave would be able to survive alone in this cruel world. That night she had a terrible dream. Ricardo held a sword in his hands and raised it high above Greta's head. He said that he knew about his sister's true intentions, and he would not allow this to happen and not let her father be hurt. The next morning, the girl and her family were sitting at the table eating breakfast. The father looked at his daughter carefully. He thought that soon she would not be so calm, but would simply dance with joy from the surprise for her. Greta turned to him with a request. She asked to be allowed to practice fencing with swords. This request surprised not only her father, but also Ricardo. Both did not expect this from the girl. The girl believed that if she learned to handle a weapon, no one would be able to defeat her. Even her life would be safer if she owned a weapon. At that moment, she was 100% sure. Victor assigned Ricardo to train his sister. The boy is not very friendly towards her, which became immediately apparent during the training. The boy behaved aggressively instead of teaching the girl fencing. A couple of days ago, Ricardo had not been very pleased with her idea of teaching her fencing. The guy believed that it would be his task to protect the girl from all enemies and foes who would dare to offend her. Greta said she wanted to be able to stand up for herself. She had no intention of humiliating her brother or hindering his development in any way. It was just her sincere desire. The father was reluctant to agree for a long time. He believed that a girl of Greta's age could ask for anything she wanted, according to her level of development. But it was definitely not fencing. However, he agreed. When Ricardo began to doubt the adequacy of this plan more and more loudly, his father said that it was his brother who would become the little girl's fencing teacher. The Duke personally taught his son how to wield a sword. And besides all this, it will be a great opportunity for the brother and sister to become even closer and get to know each other. The children humbly accepted the will of their father, who was sure that he was doing this for their common good. But during the training, when the sword, although not real, was at the girl's throat, Ricardo asked if she wanted to continue taking lessons from him. Greta doubted that such behavior would contribute to rapprochement. Victor watched the training. He noticed that the children were not very happy, but it still made them closer and promoted friendship between them. And soon the time would come when he would give the bear to the girl. She should have been delighted. The servants looked at their master, who was holding a teddy bear in his arms and talking to it. The girls could not believe that the hero of the empire was behaving so strangely, even though he was in his estate. Ricardo decided to stop training. In his opinion, the girl couldn't even hold a sword properly. Greta didn't think so. She asked to continue. His brother praised her enthusiasm, but was skeptical. The girl agreed with him. However, if she agreed to join him right now, she would no longer be able to control her behavior and change her future. so she loudly and firmly demanded to continue. Ricardo said that if the girl could do the strength complex and not get tired, then he would be able to continue training and studying, but now he had more important things to do. At that point, he left Greta. But there was no time for fruitless reflections. The girl took a pose and began to push herself off the ground. Difficulties could not break her spirits. She had to confidently step towards a better life and get what she wanted. But soon Greta collapsed. In her past life, she had no health problems. But now she remembered the years of slavery she had been in. Then she ate poorly and lost her shape right then. The girl carefully examined her body. It turned out to be much weaker than it was in a past life. It was not a matter of skills. It was a matter of her physical characteristics. It took years to restore them. Despair began to take hold of her, but now she gathered her strength and started training again. Otherwise, she would have no chance for the future. The threat to her life, which would come in 6 years, was the best motive. Evening came. Greta was still practicing on the playground with a wooden sword. Her father was watching her. But he couldn't stand it for long. He went out to her and asked her to stop. After all, she definitely wouldn't be able to do anything tomorrow. The man noticed the wounds on her palms. He applied ointment to the girl's hand. She wasn't going to resist, but her father said that was enough for today. The magic ointment should help heal the calluses from the sword. It was time to rest. Ricardo looked at his father and stepsister. The girl was not going to quit training. She was burning with the desire to improve with every second. The man assured her that this was not the best idea right now. A month passed. The girl was engaged in training with her brother. She was simply delighted with what she learned. Ricardo was really talented. It was not for nothing that the Duke himself was engaged in his training and preparation. The boy, in turn, noticed some details that he had not seen before in this girl. She looked at him with a steely, determined look and held it for a long time. Greta really looks like a Duke's kind. Ricardo was very angry with everything that Greta owned. He wanted to remain His Majesty's favorite and inherit all his possessions. If they had not found this girl that day, life would have been very good. In his thoughts, he did not notice how the opponent approached him almost face to face. The girl's sword, although a training one, was right next to his face. Ricardo was seriously agitated. Herta's prank angered him. He parried her lunge with a lightning-fast movement. The force of the blow was so great that the girl flew away from her training partner. She immediately noticed the aggression in the blow. Herta was nervous. The girl fell to the floor. Ricardo felt embarrassed that he could have hurt her. The boy was frantically going through the options in his head, and his sister lay motionless on the floor, barely breathing. The maids immediately came to the aid of the Duke's daughter. Some ran for the doctor, while others stayed with Greta and tried to bring her to consciousness. The boy felt guilty. He couldn't believe he had done this. A memory of his childhood flashed through his mind. Then his aunt hit him right in the living room. She called Ricardo a demon because he tried to hit her child. The woman was angry, and the boy wanted to cry. Now the Duke's son stood over the girl and the servant. What was bothering Greta around? Ricardo was scared. The Duke could punish him for such impudent behavior. And if something happened to his daughter, Victor would destroy him. When Greta came to, she was in her room. The maid reported that the girl had slept for 2 days. The Duke's daughter explained that she was simply very tired, and then there was that missed shot. She was not going to blame her brother for this in any way. On the contrary, she said that she would practice even more, and next time something like this would definitely not happen to her. The maid was worried about Greta's condition, but now she looked questioningly at Lauren. Greta asked what had happened to the young master. The girl said nothing. She found it strange that after everything that had happened, her sister should be interested in Ricardo's condition. The Duke's adopted son sat in a dark room. He was crying. The boy considered himself a real demon who had no place among ordinary, normal people. He wanted to escape from this place forever. The servant told the girl about Ricardo. She explained that he had hidden himself from everyone. His sobbing could be heard from behind the door of the room, but the boy refused to eat and tried to avoid people in every way. Herta asked what the Duke had to say about this. The servant said that His Majesty had been summoned to the ruler's palace and was not yet at home. The girl understood that this had not happened in the plot of the game. She did not remember it. Suddenly, the maid took Greta by the hand. The girl asked the hostess to somehow influence Mr. Ricardo. After all, if he doesn't eat, he will start having health problems. When the Duke finds out about this, he will be very angry. Ricardo remembered his childhood. He was born and raised in a village. His family was not wealthy, but it was the happiest childhood in the world. But unfortunately, it did not last long. Soon, a fire destroyed everything. At the age of 7, their house burned down. The fire took away the most precious thing from the boy. The little one found himself on the street without the slightest understanding of what to do next. No one was going to help or save him. But one day a man came looking for him. He called himself a servant of Count Sanar and was going to take the little boy with him. That very day, everything changed. The boy's life became almost carefree and secure. Ricardo was met by a woman. She seemed friendly and kind, but her face contorted into a grimace. The stranger said that the boy could call her mother. This surprised and worried him. From this woman, Ricardo learned that his mother had been a servant of Count Sanar for a long time, and the boy himself turned out to be the illegitimate son of a nobleman. It was after the tragedy that they decided to take the boy to the Count's house. The Count's wife had been unable to conceive for a long time, so she fully supported her husband's idea of adopting Ricardo. She took up the boy's upbringing and eventually turned him into the child of an aristocrat. But the little boy's happiness was broken by the appearance of his brother. A boy was born, whom they named Luke. From that time on, the parents paid less and less attention to Ricardo. All their energy and efforts belonged to the newborn. Ricardo became an empty space within the walls of this estate. He often sneaked into Luke's bedroom and watched the little one. Various thoughts at that time visited his older brother, but he rejected them and was afraid to even remember them. One day, his mother caught him looking at his younger brother. The woman became violent. She wanted to lie to everyone that her older adopted son was trying to harm her child. This was clearly not true. Ricardo hoped until the last that he would return to a full life and become a happy member of the Count's family. But his dreams were not destined to come true. He became a stranger to his parents. His mother slapped him hard on the cheek and told him not to come near Luke again. She said she knew about the plan to kill the baby and take his place in the family. But the bastard definitely wouldn't succeed. They would chase him away. The beaten Ricardo tried to appeal to the heart of his mother, who was already calming Luke, whom she held in her arms. The adopted son tried to explain that the woman had misunderstood everything. His words were useless. The Count's wife ordered him not to even come near her, and never to call her mother again. Instead, she called the guards and ordered them to take the boy to the attic and leave him there alone so that he could repent. Ricardo knocked on the door, but no one was going to let him in. He screamed loudly and begged to believe that he had nothing against his little brother. On the contrary, he wanted a real, complete family. And now, when a lot of time had passed since that moment, he remembered those events. The boy was worried that he might hurt Greta and be kicked out again, or something worse would happen to him. He was already an adult. Greta wanted to go to her brother and talk to him. She was afraid that it might trigger another death flag. But she was more worried about how Ricardo would treat her after all this. The girl suggested that he come out to her. Besides, everyone around was worried about him. The Duke's son had been refusing to eat for several days. It could have harmed him, but Ricardo assured him that this was his punishment. He said that he would never dare to approach his sister again and would never insult her with words. The girl was happy. This could only mean that she would be safe and nothing would threaten her for the rest of her life. But it wasn't really that simple, and Greta understood that. She said she couldn't train for so long in vain. Besides, she had to control one of her main death flags. Ricardo was surprised by her words, and he was even more surprised when she ran into the boy's room and fell right into his arms. The door closed behind her and stubbornly refused to open. An uncomfortable situation arose. The servants who came to hear the noise reported that the door had been slammed shut by a very strong blow. However, there was nothing he could do for now. He had to wait for the arrival of the master and a specialist who would free her. Greta felt embarrassed to be in the same room with her death flag for so long, but Ricardo did not seem angry or offended. On the contrary, he was gloomy and unhappy. The boy offered to discuss the details right away. He explained that the difference between them was that they were of different blood. And in fact, Ricardo was the adopted son of a duke whose fate was not easy. But despite everything, he was brought to this house to raise a future heir. He had been afraid all his life that the situation from his childhood would repeat itself. And now, in his opinion, everything was turning around and going in a new direction. Ricardo said that he was very angry that the Duke wanted to make her his heir, and he did not want to give up for a long time. But this hatred and hostility led to only one thing. the guy harmed Greta. In his mind, he had no choice. His chances of staying in the manor were diminishing with every passing minute. He was afraid that he would be thrown out onto the street again. And what was even more terrifying was that he actually believed himself to be a demon. Greta believed that the boy had been thinking about the demon and punishment for a long time. These were the consequences of his childhood trauma, which he had received during his stay in the Count's house. And now it was time for the girl to speak out. She announced that she refuses to be an heiress. Instead, Greta wants to build her own destiny and live her life the way she wants. And when she leaves this estate, she will leave everything to Ricardo. The boy asked how she was going to manage without the Duke's support in the future, to which the girl replied that she had been a slave in the past, so she would definitely be able to find work to make ends meet. She added that the life of a young lady is definitely not for her. Everyone around is very nice and friendly, but the reason for this is not in human qualities, but in her origin and status as a father. Ricardo assured that Victor would not allow this. As soon as His Majesty learns that his daughter has run away from home, he will send all his forces to search for her. The Duke will not let his heiress and the last hope of his family disappear. Greta was truly afraid of this. Greta understood perfectly well that her father would do just that, and so the boy himself had to help solve this problem. She developed a plan to drive her father crazy. Now they would discuss everything and decide. After the girl explained her plan in detail, Ricardo immediately expressed his doubts about it. But Greta said that now was not the time to think about it. In order for the plan to work, he needed his brother's help. The brief persuasion did have an effect on Ricardo. He promised his help and support. In return, the girl had a few more questions for him. The guy didn't really want to be a victim of interrogations by His Majesty's daughter. Greta asked about the incident at training. She was interested in whether it was really an accident. The boy replied that he himself had lost control of the situation. Everything that happened then was reflex. The girl asked to forgive her. After all, she was to blame for provoking him. She was the first to hit Ricardo, and he automatically responded to the attack. After all, he is not a demon, but even a very good boy. The Duke's daughter added that everyone was worried about Ricardo's condition. It was not right to behave so badly when they were released. Ricardo could not believe that his sister was not angry with him, but on the contrary, worried about him. Duke Victor sat before King Xeras. The man asked the ruler what had brought him to the palace in the capital. Xeras said that he had urgent and important business for his subject. The king said that he planned to marry the Duke's daughter. Her fiancé was to be a descendant of the Duke of Charm. This news did not please Victor very much. He hoped that the monarch would not notice his expression. Taras began to talk about how the marriage would strengthen Victor's position, but the Duke knew very well that the king was afraid of Duke Garm. After all, he was so rich and influential that he was called the Second King. Victor said that he did not need the protection of the Grand Duke, and if Xeras wanted to strengthen his own affairs, he could marry the princess to the son of the Charm family. The monarch did not expect to be given such an answer. The Duke said that he would not want to see a descendant of the Garm family next to his dear daughter. Although the son of the Duke of Charm was only 12, he was very cunning and knew how to get out of any situation. The king was angered by Victor's words, who said that he had only recently found his daughter and would like her to choose a suitable match for herself in the future. Xeras asked who could be more suitable. The ruler suddenly laughed. He understood that the Duke hoped to improve his position by using his adopted son, but none of the aristocrats would want to see him as a member of their family. In addition, there was gossip around that Ricardo had once been driven away from the Count for attempting to kill his younger brother. This angered Duke Victor. He loudly declared that he did not want to hear such a thing. Victor added that Ricardo had never tried to do anything like that, and no one wanted to listen to the little one, so now he was going to leave the palace. The king asked him to stay and listen to the end. The Duke did not listen to the shouts behind him. He was going to get out of this place. Bird's talk of marriage was not worth the 2 days he had spent in the capital. A servant who ran up brought the news from Victor's estate. The servant reported that the news concerned Mr. Ricardo and Lady Greta. During His Majesty's absence, something had happened at his estate. Victor was afraid to hear what the man would say. He was preparing for the worst. The girl woke up on Ricardo's bed. The guy was sitting on the floor next to her. She didn't realize she had fallen asleep while discussing the plan. The castle should have been repaired a long time ago, so she slept here for too long. But it happened differently. The Duke kicked down the door. He was afraid for the fate of his children. But he arrived in time. The children were delighted with his appearance. Ricardo wondered in his heart what his adoptive father was doing to him now for wounding Greta. Victor knelt down in front of the children. He hugged them both tightly and didn't want to let them go. The man explained that as soon as he received the news that they were trapped, he immediately set off for the estate. The father asked, "Is everything they say about Greta being injured in training true?" The boy expected the most terrible punishment, but the Duke assured him that anything happens, and the main thing is that the children are safe and sound. Ricardo asked why he was not punished. After all, Greta was the daughter and a dear child to the Duke, to which the father replied that they were both very valuable to him and equally important. There was no difference between them. The boy began to list the signs that he was not Victor's biological son. The man assured him that they had spent the past 10 years without the girl searching. He had adopted the boy so that he would have an heir. The Duke recalled how he personally engaged in the upbringing and education of Ricardo, how he once lost his wife and daughter. All these years the boy was by their side, and there were no quarrels or complaints between them. At one time the boy had regained his lust for His Majesty's life. Now Victor was asking for his forgiveness for not having spoken on the subject before. But he was asking Ricardo not to speak or think of such things again. Victor asked not to raise such an issue again because Greta and Ricardo were the same to him, and there was no difference between them for him, and they could talk about the inheritance and the procedure for acquiring it later. The girl ran to her father and asked him to punish Ricardo for pushing her down the stairs. It was a memory from the past, when the girl wanted to hurt her little brother and frame him for punishment by her father. Greta was frightened by her memories. She believed that if she had behaved in a similar way now, she might not have achieved a rapprochement between her father and Ricardo. However, now she had already changed her future a little. The father turned to the girl and suggested that they should not waste time and go have breakfast. The children must have been very hungry during the time they had spent locked in that room. But she pointed to Ricardo, who was standing in the middle of the room. The boy came up to her and said that he was very grateful to her. She didn't immediately understand what he was talking about. He said that the crazy Lindhaugen family wouldn't be able to live without him. They both laughed. A few days later, the girl and her brother stood before their father. She said that she had made the decision to become the leader on her own. Victor was surprised by this decision, but he had nothing to say against it. Both were playing a play that they had agreed on in advance. The girl still didn't believe her brother's words, but the main thing was that her father believed in them. Overall, it seemed that he believed both of them, believed in their intentions. This was part of a plan to drive her father crazy. The girl would behave very well and would even be raised as a lady and the future heir to her father's family. But when she came of age, she would run away. Now she had no chance to hide from Victor, but over time her chances would increase. Ricardo asked where she was going to run away to. The girl replied that she would save up money and buy herself a house to live in. Greta was already thinking about the beautiful country life, filled with peace and quiet. Her brother could not believe that the heiress of a duke could dream of something like that and hope for such a future. Despite all her fears and doubts, the girl will not be an obstacle to Ricardo taking over the post of leader after her disappearance. Taking advantage of the chaos, the girl will hide and wait out the search, and her brother will become the ruler. Greta stood before her father. She tried to reason with him as to why she should become the head. In her mind, she considered the question of how the further away she was from the estate, the better her chances of survival in the future. The man started crying. His son and daughter asked what had happened. Victor explained that he wanted the family to remain intact and that none of the children would ever think of leaving their parents' nest. Despite all the hardships, they were together. Victor said that it was time to start training the young lady. He had a list of specialists who could take care of this matter. The girl only now realized how difficult the role she had been given was. The girl's former owner was talking to a man in a hood. The stranger asked if the merchant had really sold the girl to the Duke. The Duke replied that the fool had paid 3 times her real price. Under the hood was the woman who had kidnapped Herta. She was still trying to profit from the story. The girl she had kidnapped had since gained wealth and status, and the woman was left with nothing. Greta, in the stranger's opinion, simply could not be happy. The stranger would take care of that. She would not allow the former slave to live in peace. After all, this should not be the case in life under any circumstances. But her plans were also not destined to come true. The stranger and Greta's former master lay dead on the floor. Another unknown man stood above them. He held a knife in his hands, with which he dealt with the conspirators. Soon after that, Gerda began to study, as befits a true lady. The volume of subjects was very large. From the very beginning, the girl was worried that she would not have time for anything. However, her brother helped. Added to all this were almost daily fencing training. Sometimes it took a very long time. Greta would fall down without strength, and Victor or Ricardo would demand that she get up and enter a new duel. The girl stubbornly ignored all the warnings of her fencing instructor. She demanded to be more detailed in her training. After all, her proximity to the other death flags depended on it. Ricardo began to suspect something. It was no wonder his sister insisted that sword training take up most of her free time. Besides, she often used that strange phrase about flags. The guy helped Victor sort through the documents and correspondence. Ricardo thought about how his sister's life would turn out in the future. He was also confused by his father's behavior. He had been acting strange lately. Victor called the boy. He wanted to consult with his son. The boy was surprised when his father asked if his brother knew what Greta was dreaming about. This question was strange not only in form, but also in content. The Duke said that he often gave his daughter jewelry and expensive gifts, but it was more like a custom. He did not know what his daughter really thought and dreamed about. Ricardo guessed that his sister's birthday was coming up soon. The girl was kidnapped right after birth. This would be her first birthday to be celebrated, and she would spend it with a loving family. What was more disconcerting was his father, who mentioned the teddy bear. Victor doubted that a 13-year-old girl would like a teddy bear. Ricardo interpreted his father's question in his own way. The boy said that he would ask Greta today what she wanted. Victor asked not to do this. After all, it was supposed to be a surprise for his daughter. The father believed his son and did not ask any more questions. After all, a long tongue could harm the celebration for his heiress. Gerda walked down the corridor. She was tired of the constant classes. Their diversity and different directions tired the girl more than anything. She had lost hope of mastering all these fields of knowledge and processing information. There was still a lot of work to do, and she was already tired. But the most important thing was to avoid the death flags so as not to jeopardize her plan for the future. Greta ran into her brother. The boy took the girl by the hand and led her aside. He had something to tell her and consult with her. Judging by the way Ricardo was behaving, it was something important and urgent, because he hadn't explained anything yet. Ricardo took her to the garden where he sat her down on a bench. The girl said that she had a class soon, and she might be late for it. Her brother advised her to calm down, because she was always late and nothing bad would happen. He said that he only comes to this place when he is very tired and wants to rest. Ricardo said that he understands perfectly well what his sister is going through now. After all, he was also being prepared for the role of successor. The girl fell asleep on the bench. She woke up only when evening came. Greta asked why her brother didn't wake her up. He explained that he had tried, but it was all in vain. Her sister didn't even want to let go of his hand. The girl was going to go apologize to her mentors and teachers. Although she was the daughter of a duke, one cannot treat one's teachers and mentors so lightly. Ricardo remembered his mission. He asked, what would the girl want as a gift? She often receives different things from her father, but perhaps she wanted something specific, and most of all, the girl was surprised. Greta understood what her little brother was leaning towards. She said that she had already received many things from her father as gifts. However, she would not tell about what she wanted most because it was a very terrible secret. It could not be told. In the evening, the father listened to what Ricardo told him. The boy told him the conversation. Victor believed that such antics were the norm for girls his daughter's age, but this did not make it any easier. The Duke did not want to believe that his daughter was hiding something from him. Perhaps it was some kind of secret test. Victor racked his brains over how to please his daughter. It was hard to imagine what she would want. It was Gerda's birthday. She didn't know what had been prepared for her, but the girl's eyes were blindfolded and she couldn't really see anything until a certain point. This confused and intrigued her. Ricardo took her hand and led her down the corridor of the estate. The girl asked where they were going, but she never received answers to her questions. The day promised to be eventful and interesting. A strange thought was running through her mind. Since the very morning, Lauren had woken her up very early and said that a young gentleman wanted to see her sister. Her brother had blindfolded her and was taking her somewhere now. Maybe he would push her off a cliff. When Ricardo allowed her to open her eyes, the girl saw her father and a pile of presents in front of her. The girl didn't expect that anyone else would remember her birthday. It was very sweet and unexpected. Victor gave her a blue teddy bear, which he had wanted to give the girl for so long. The father did not think that he had chosen the right gift. Probably, girls her age do not really like such surprises. But the toy turned out to be very cute. Greta cried. For the first time in her life, she received a gift. In her past life, no one had ever given her such pleasant surprises. So she honestly answered that she was simply delighted with what they had done for her. The Duke looked at his daughter. How happy she was for her first birthday in 13 years. Victor would have liked her mother to see her now. But the man stopped himself at this thought. You can't be sad on a holiday. Images of his wife with Herta and Ricardo flashed before his eyes. Unfortunately, these were just empty fantasies. But for a long time they gave him the strength to hold on and fight for his life. The girl went up to her father and asked to hug her. Gertie was a little embarrassed, because such behavior was not appropriate for a girl her age. At 13, you talk to your father a little differently. At least that's what she thought. Greta asked if Ricardo had prepared a present for her. The boy cut off a piece of cake and asked his sister to open her mouth. When she did, he put the piece in her mouth and said that it was a present. Victor did not like this gesture. He ordered Ricardo to go to the playground and perform 1,000 swings with his sword. The girl supported her father. The brother obeyed their orders. But he was not angry with his loved ones. Hertha eventually added to her room's furnishings with a collection of teddy bears. The servant was delighted with these toys. The young lady said that soon she would have no place to store them, but she was delighted with them. In the royal palace, a girl opened the window of her room. The girl was delighted with the beauty of the surrounding nature. She believed that everything around was created for pleasure and admiring beauty. Some time passed. Greta turned 17. Life was filled with the usual worries for an heiress of an aristocratic family. The princess was to come into her life in exactly 1 year. This was to happen at a banquet specially arranged for the princess in honor of her coming of age. It was then that the thief Greta would appear, and she would do everything in her power to prevent the princess and her new chosen one from being together in the future. Greta and the princess were the same age. The following year, the girl was to receive an invitation to a tea party at Her Highness's palace in the capital. It was then that the events of the game would begin, which would end with the girl's death. The Duke's daughter would prefer to escape from home before then, but she has found no one who would be willing to keep her company. Will she manage to find an accomplice less than a year before the planned escape from her father's estate? The Duke studied the letter that the servant had brought him that morning. The man could not believe that the text of the message had been written by a normal, adequate person. The proposal expressed in the letter was definitely unnecessary and inappropriate. The letter addressed the Duke with a question regarding his permission to marry his daughter. Victor had not returned to this issue for a long time. It was obvious that without the king's will, no one would dare to do this. The maid brought another tray of letters from gentlemen. All the messages talked about the girl's marriage and praised the candidates for Greta. The Duke ordered the letters to be burned. Lauren told the landlady that His Majesty was repelling all attempts by neighboring young men to marry his daughter. The girl believed that her father's overprotectiveness could have a negative impact on her future life. The servant asked if the young mistress already had someone. T replied that she did not meet boys for a simple reason. She never did. She did not attend balls and soirees, but the time would come to get married. Lauren asked what kind of husband her mistress would like. The girl thought for a moment. It's hard to answer such a question right away. When the lady described her potential suitor, the servant mentioned Ricardo. He was the one who completely fit Greta's description. The Duke's daughter said that it was wrong. But now she herself noticed that the guy next to her had changed for the better. Not only she noticed this, but everyone around her as well. Ricardo and Greta were sitting in the library. The young man was telling the girl about her family tree. The lady was getting distracted. She couldn't concentrate on the subject. Finally, the Duke's daughter admitted that history wasn't her subject. Greta thought about her half-brother. After so many years of intense training and self-improvement, he had taken his rightful place. People admired the talent of the young knight who was about to join the order. Their plan, that the girl would pass on the title of head of the house to him, was confidently coming to fruition. No one could have guessed that the young people had conceived such a cunning plan. But Greta was looking forward to her time. It was precisely because there was still a lot to do and a huge amount of knowledge to master that the girl studied with her brother at night. She noticed that over the years, Ricardo had turned into a real handsome man. The young man addressed his sister very seriously. He emphasized that she should devote more time to her studies than to fencing. The girl thought differently. She insisted on physical training. Soon she would have enough money to spend on her life. Most of all, she was looking forward to a peaceful life where she wouldn't need her sword skills. The lady would start managing the household herself. His brother distracted him from his thoughts. He changed. His mood worsened. The boy asked if Greta was sorry to leave her father's estate and leave him alone with his life. Victor spent a lot of time and effort searching for her. The boy was sitting very close to Greta. She felt something strange. It wasn't like a suspicion that her brother wanted to turn the corner and change their plans for the future. The feeling was new. Ricardo came even closer. He looked into Greta's eyes and asked, "Is it necessary for her to leave home? Does she really not want to remain the daughter of a nobleman and live her life like that? Perhaps with a beloved, worthy man?" The moment was broken by a maidservant looking for her mistress. The young man said that was enough for today. He wished her good night and decided to go to his room so as not to arouse unnecessary suspicion from the servants. When Lauren approached the lady, she said that most likely her brother wanted to strangle her. That's why he grabbed her by the neck, and everyone around him thought that he had changed and become kinder and more reserved, balanced. Ricardo came into the room and fell on the bed helplessly. He thought about Greta. The young man planned a future with her. He understood that he loved the girl, but how difficult it was to do what he had planned. He called himself an idiot and fell asleep. In the morning at breakfast, Victor looked carefully at the children and asked if everything was okay. He wondered if anything had happened yesterday. The Duke noticed how strangely they were behaving with each other, so he asked. Greta and her brother assured her that everything was fine and that the Duke had nothing to worry about. But his daughter thought to herself that she should talk to Ricardo again, so as not to attract any more attention or arouse suspicion. Victor also added that something they had been talking about for a long time had finally happened. An invitation had arrived from the royal family. They were invited to an official tea ceremony held for the princess's birthday. Greta wasn't thrilled with the idea. She was beginning to sense that the time to act was fast approaching. The usual schedule was changing, and the past was unchangeable. She didn't want to get nervous, but it was scary. This debut, which was held in honor of the coming of age of all the aristocrats of the empire, was the first event of the game that the girl still remembered. She did not want to get into it. After all, in that case, the death flags were approaching. It was at this ceremony that Greta was supposed to tip a teacup over to Her Highness the Princess. This set a precedent for what would happen next, and this was one of the biggest death flags in her life. The girl thought that this ceremony was only for those who had reached the age of 18. However, her father assured her that those who had turned 17 this year also participated in it. Greta realized that she had made a mistake in starting the game. She had miscalculated the time. At this pace, she would definitely be drawn into the main plot, from which it would be very difficult to get out. Lady said that she did not want to go there. The father said that they could not miss this event. After all the aristocrats of the state were supposed to be present at this event. But he was still curious about why his daughter was so reluctant to attend this event. Greta replied that there was no specific reason for this. Her father said that he would not let her be offended, and if something worried or scared her daughter, he and Ricardo would be able to protect her from all troubles. The girl was surprised by her father's calmness. She didn't behave like Greta from the games. However, now it was worth acting carefully. Greta is no longer the girl from the game. She is kind and has 100, and she won't spill tea on the princess. After breakfast, Greta was overcome with despair. She thought that the events of the game were about to begin. Instead, she had another secret option. It was to escape immediately. Besides, she had already saved up money. The decision to run away immediately after the ceremony was entirely satisfactory to the girl. But now the situation was such that the girl thought about her father and brother, how they would feel after this reconnaissance of hers. The girl gathered her thoughts once again and drove all doubts from her head. She should first of all think only about herself now. Others can do without her and continue living. The flags should disappear. The son of the Duke of Sharma stood before a large portrait of Nretu. The boy gazed at the girl with admiration. He admitted to himself that she was the perfect match for him as his queen. The day of the ceremony arrived. The Duke was nervous, but when he saw his daughter in a new dress, chosen especially for the ceremony, all doubts and fears disappeared from his head. The father was delighted with his daughter. Victor demanded that an artist be called immediately after the reception to paint a portrait of the girl. Their descendants must surely see such beauty. The girl resembled a red rose in the garden that had bloomed. Ricardo brought a ceremonial sword for his adoptive father. The girl looked closely at her brother. He was truly handsome. Somewhere deep down in her soul, jealousy for the young man and the other ladies awoke. But the boy reminded him that his father would not be able to attend the ceremony today. By order of His Highness King Zeras, the Duke had been sent to the border to guard and protect the kingdom's lands. Ricardo assured her that he would personally accompany her sister to the ball. The daughter thanked the Duke for taking such care of her. She mentally thanked fate for the chance to leave the estate. The guests looked at Greta and Ricardo. Everyone agreed that the daughter of His Majesty the Duke was extremely beautiful and very similar to her late mother. The girl is uncomfortable being the center of attention. Ricardo noticed that she was worried about something. However, Greta did not want to drag him into it. She replied that everything was fine, but she admitted that she would like to be out of the spotlight. Her brother advised her not to hang her nose. The girl remembered that after the incident in the library, they had avoided each other's company for a very long time. But now her brother's behavior somehow alarmed her. She didn't mind him being around. With his gaze, the young man made it clear to all the young people around him that he did not want unnecessary attention to his person. From the very beginning, it was worth greeting the royal blood who were somewhere nearby, and then get down to business. Ricardo advised the girl to relax. He was sure that the princess was the same age as his sister, so they could become friends. Greta was not afraid of this. She was simply afraid of meeting the princess and the flags of death. The brother left his sister alone and went in search of the princess and her daughter. Deep down, Greta wanted to avoid meeting the girl at all, but there was nothing she could do. Otherwise, her behavior would become too suspicious. A stranger was passing by Greta. The Duke's daughter accidentally touched her, and wine from the glass spilled onto the stranger's dress. This happened accidentally, and the victim screamed and screamed. She accused Greta of having deliberately poured wine on the girl. People started shouting at the girl. After all, she had dared to pour wine on the princess herself. The Duke's daughter became nervous. The death flags were nearby. The girl remembered the events of her past life. Then, after this episode, she laughed at the princess, saying that her dress was too simple. But the wine stain would make it more refined and elegant. But Greta also remembered another moment. In the game, she poured tea, not wine, on the princess. Then everyone looked closely at the girls, but more attention and condemnation went to Duchess Lindhagen, who dared to behave like that. A stranger appeared behind the girl. He put his hand on Greta's shoulder. The young man apologized for being distracted. His touch was so pleasant and repulsive to the girl at the same time. His very presence was unsettling. The stranger, who was the son of the Charm family, tried to look into the girl's eyes. His intentions were still unknown to Greta. However, the former slave did not read anything good for herself in his expression. Jules Charme asked the princess to forgive his companion. The guests whispered around. They certainly did not know that the descendants of the great families of the dukes had arrived here together. Besides, Lady Greta was originally with another gentleman. Meanwhile, Jules was justifying Greta to the princess. The young man emphasized that it was he who asked his companion to bring something for him, and since she was in a hurry to bring something for him, she doused the princess. The descendant of the Charmes said that as compensation he would make a nice gift for Her Highness. He would give her an expensive dress, which she would choose for herself. Those present were amazed at how the guy resolved the situation. Greta herself bowed low to the monarch and apologized for her inappropriate actions and inappropriate behavior. She added that she had never even considered the idea of offending or humiliating the princess. In fact, the Duke's daughter didn't even remember the moment she pushed the princess. But she wasn't going to spoil the situation and relations with such an influential person over such a trifle. The death flag must be destroyed. Greta hoped that Her Highness would see her repentance and humanity and would not be angry with her for this. And if the princess did not object, then the girl was ready to clean the wine stain from the dress. That should reconcile. The guests who heard the last proposal could not believe their ears. That a representative of a noble and distinguished family would make such a low-brow proposal to the king's daughter. This had never happened before. The princess hesitated. She thought that everything should have developed in a slightly different scenario. The girl replied to Greta that she shouldn't worry about it. If the Duke's daughter apologized, then they were flowers. The king's daughter turned around and ordered her assistant, whose name was Fritz, to follow her. If Greta had been more attentive, she would have noticed that the princess was angry and irritated. Joel approached the girl. He gently and carefully took her hand and suggested that they go talk alone. The young man's smile was attractive at first glance, but something sinister was hidden behind it. They sat down on a park bench. Joel decided to introduce himself, as was customary among aristocrats. He was glad to meet her, even though it had happened under such strange circumstances. Greta reciprocated. Joel charm wanted from her. He was the main opponent of the Duke's daughter in the game. Later, this young man would become the founder of the anti-royalist faction in the game universe. Joel, with his promises and sweet words, had charmed the girl and lured her to his side in the confrontation. Greta was followed by her father. From a national hero, he had turned into an enemy of the crown. In any case, it was not worth being around such a guy. He could offend and easily mislead anyone. Greta decided that it was better to end this acquaintance because it would not lead to anything good. According to her plan, she wasn't supposed to meet him at all, but in the game, the circumstances of their acquaintance were completely different. The girl thought of a reason why she could leave his company. Finally, she changed her mind about lying. Greta replied that her older brother was probably looking for her now. He was definitely nervous and worried about her. After thanking her once again for saving her, the girl got up from the bench and left. Joel asked why the girl was disgusted by his company. After all, she shouldn't have apologized to the princess. These words stopped Greta. She believed that the young man was trying to manipulate her in some way. The descendant of the Charm family took her by the shoulders and asked why she had to bow her head before all sorts of aristocrats and nobles who were not even close to her family members. The girl was confused. Her friend's flattering words were like honey in her ears. Joel promised that if she became his ally, she would have everything she could dream of. No one would disturb her peace, and she would not need anything. The boy took her hair in his hand. He swore that from then on she would be his bride and queen, and he would think only of her. The charm promised to make her a goddess before whom everyone would bow and obey her. Joel seemed to hypnotize with his words. He asked to conquer this state with him. The young man was too close to the girl. The Duke's daughter felt like she was falling into a trap, but she could not admit it. Luckily, Ricardo was passing by. He noticed something strange was happening, so he decided to intervene because it didn't seem like the girl was happy with the company she was in. So his brother decided to intervene. The young man stood between Greta and Joel. He asked the gentleman what he wanted from his sister. Ricardo asked the stranger to move away and stop clinging to his sister. Charm was not at a loss. He appreciated his opponent. The young man accurately assessed that he was the adopted son of the Duke of Lindhagen's family. Joel said that even though he was the lady's brother, it was not nice to interrupt the conversation like that. With dignity, he leaned over and asked the boy to make his face simpler. He clearly had a sister complex. These words angered Ricardo too much and touched him deeply. A strange atmosphere settled between the young men. Greta could even feel it physically. It seemed to her that she didn't know something, that some secret was present between the boys, but they were hiding it. These two were more like two wild animals preparing for a fight and circling each other. Joel was confident, but Ricardo somehow scared and worried him. He was afraid of the bastard. Finally, Charm took a moment to approach Greta and tenderly kiss her on the forehead with words of farewell. Ricardo was furious at such an act, but he could not attack from behind like a coward. It seemed to the girl that too many events had happened in one day. Her head was ready to burst from experiences and impressions. Greta wanted to be in peace now and away from all the people and problems. The next morning, his brother had to go on business. The girl asked him if he had forgotten that he was going to become a knight. He must not forget to take anything important with him. Greta's concern was pleasant to him. In turn, he could think of nothing better than to wish her to take care of herself and rest today. The events of the previous day were still visible on her face. She had experienced a lot of stress and could have fallen ill. Today, she could safely cancel all tasks and devote herself to rest and sleep. The girl thanked him for his concern, but in reality she had completely different plans. Although Ricardo's departure made her very sad. She led the carriage in which her brother rode. Mentally, she blessed him and asked all her patrons to help him on his journey and on his further journey as a knight and protector. But for her, the time had come to act. Greta was packing her things in her room. She decided to escape right now. There was no one at home. Her father had not yet returned from guard duty. Her brother had left. It was hard to find a more opportune moment. Yesterday had opened her eyes. After the events at the tea party, the main character, Greta, tried her best to get made a maid of honor, and later a maid of honor, to the princess. Actually, she did this not with noble intentions and not for anyone's good. But now the girl was more worried about the appearance of Joel. His proposal clearly led to the fact that Greta and her father would join the ranks of the anti-royalists and become enemies of the king. Thus, the game would definitely be able to enslave her. Greta packed her bag for the journey. Her intention to get away and continue living peacefully somewhere in the outback was becoming stronger with every passing moment. It was painful for the girl to leave her father and brother, but her life depended on it. Suddenly, the girl's gaze stopped at the teddy bear toys. Greta remembered her father. He could sometimes be too soft, but in reality he was a fair ruler, a loving father and a caring master of his lands. Her plans were disrupted by a maid who ran screaming into the young lady's room. The girl announced that an unexpected guest had arrived. The tone in which this was said indicated the guest's high status and the unusualness of his appearance. A princess visited the duke's estate. She asked to be treated to tea and to arrange a miniature tea ceremony. The king's daughter asked the hostess if she had not disrupted her plans by her appearance. Greta herself was very much troubled by the question of what Princess Marielle was doing in her chambers. The girl herself answered the question of the duke's daughter. Marielle said that she had come to talk. The princess asked if Greta would like to become her maid. The king's daughter was still impressed by what had happened at the banquet in the palace of the capital. She would like to have such a person by her side all the time. Marielle added that they were almost the same age, so they would definitely become friends. And working around the ruling family was never a demanding or difficult job, and the girl would be able to work right in the palace. Greta tried to say that she was currently training to get the position of duchess that her father had promised her, so she couldn't just jump out of bed and leave everything she was doing. In fact, she regretted that she had spent so much energy trying to distract herself from the plot. Now she had to give up everything and jeopardize her own existence because of some princess's whim. The next moment, Marielle hit Greta. She gave the girl a hard slap. The princess pretended that nothing had happened, but she, in a tone that did not suggest any contradiction, insisted on playing her role properly. Otherwise, something very terrible and irreparable could have happened. No one present dared to contradict Her Highness, and the girl pretended that everything was actually fine, and there was not even a slap. Marielle asked the girl what she thought was the reason she hit Greta. In fact, she considered herself the main character of this world, so no one could disobey her and go against the will of the princess. Marielle's attention turned to the teddy bear. She asked when Greta had been given this toy. She said it was a gift from her father. So the princess guessed that the girl treasured this gift. Her Highness resorted to crude blackmail. She asked if she would not be mistaken if she said that Greta's father was on guard at the border. It was within Marielle's power to change and extend the Duke's term of service. The border was a very dangerous place. Danger and battle await the most unexpected moment for a careless soldier. After all, for a long time Victor might not even return home. After all, he could simply die. The stunned Greta knew what the princess was talking about. She was trying to get her consent to become a maid of honor and to force her to obey her will. She could not refuse this thief because she loved her father very much. Ricardo returned. He bowed and said that he was very happy to see such high-ranking guests in his parents' house. The young man asked if his sister had offended Her Highness in any way and made her nervous. While they were exchanging pleasantries, Ricardo's trained eye noticed a mark on his sister's cheek. Thus he concluded that his sister had been beaten. A strange suspicion crept into his mind. Marielle insisted that she had managed to befriend the Duke's daughter, and she had agreed to become her maid. She had welcomed the offer with joy. Ricardo could not believe what he was hearing. Not long ago, his sister had dreamed of leaving the house that had been a kind of golden cage for her, and now she wanted to become this girl's servant. After all, not much good was said about the princess. Marielle hugged the girl and said that they would have fun together. They would become true friends, and nothing could stop their strong friendship. Greta said through force that it was her choice, and she was happy. But her brother immediately noticed that she simply had to say it. He had no idea how the princess could have such an effect on the girl. But it was definitely something very serious and even, perhaps, dangerous. The princess said it was time to say goodbye. She would eagerly await the arrival of the new servant and hoped it would be very soon. and the conversation that had just taken place would remain a secret between them. Marielle noticed Ricardo's gaze on her. The boy asked without ceremony if the princess knew why his sister's cheek was red. It was clear that someone had hit her, and Greta herself looked frightened and nervous. Her Highness said she had no idea what had happened. The young master reminded her not to forget the culprits and to hand them over to him. She asked what the boy would do with them. He simply remained silent. This silence said more than 1,000 words could express. But he did not intimidate the princess with this. Although he understood that he would not be able to openly confront her, he would not allow her much either. A carriage was driving through the night city. In it was the princess with her assistant. They discussed the events of the past day. Ricardo, in her opinion, is very kind, and the thief will become her maid, as was supposed to be according to the plot. Mariella said that everything should have been as it was in the game, and she is simply trying to keep life from chaos by all available methods. Mistakes must be corrected and people guided on the right path.